It was late at night on July 15, 2017, around 11:30 p.m., when Antonio heard the unmistakable sound of creaking wood coming from the side of the house. The room lights were already off, but he was still lying in bed, absorbed in a game on his phone. The noise snapped him out of it. Curious, and a little uneasy, he got up and headed to the kitchen, then out to the backyard to check things out. But the area was empty. Everything seemed still and quiet. That's when his eyes were drawn to the side of the house. The window to his parents' room was wide open, swaying slightly. Something felt off. He moved closer, his steps cautious. Just as he got near, the window suddenly slammed shut, from the inside. Hi there, and welcome to our channel. Today, we're diving into another shocking real-life event that reminds us how strange and unsettling the world can be. This time, the story takes us to Valencia City, Philippines. It all begins with a young man who couldn't help but notice something odd happening late at night. His neighbor's husband was frequently seen sneaking into his parents' room, sometimes through the window, other times boldly entering through the front door in the dead of night. What's really going on here? Why was this happening? And what's the full story behind this eerie case? Stick with us as we dig deeper and uncover the unsettling details. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And hey, share this story with your friends. It's a good one. So, here's how it goes. There was a man named Francisco, born in 1970 in Malabale City, Philippines. He had a bachelor's degree in economics, but office life wasn't for him. After just 2 months of working a desk job, he quit and decided to follow in his uncle's footsteps by selling fruits. At 24, Francisco moved to Valencia City, leaving his parents behind to carve out his own path. He was determined, hardworking, and a real fighter. By 25, his fruit business had taken off, and he even had a few employees working for him. Now, Francisco wasn't exactly slim. He had a stocky, chubby build even as a teenager. When he was getting ready to marry his fiancée, Imelda, in 1994, his family and friends encouraged him to diet to fit into his wedding clothes and stay healthy. But losing weight wasn't easy for him. His body type just didn't cooperate. Regardless, in October 1994, he married Imelda, the woman who would stand by his side through thick and thin. Imelda was also a go-getter. She started her own business selling flowers and plants, which did really well. Life was good. In 1996, Francisco became close friends with a fruit truck driver named Guam, who worked for one of his suppliers. They saw each other nearly every day, and their bond grew strong. Guam was 10 years younger, but Francisco treated him like a little brother. He often invited Guam to family events, and before long, the two families were close-knit. In 1999, Imelda gave birth to a baby boy, whom they named Antonio. He was a beautiful, healthy baby, and the family couldn't have been happier. For Francisco's father, who had waited 5 years for a grandchild, it was a dream come true. A few years later, in 2004, things changed for Guam. The fruit supplier he worked for went out of business. Francisco offered him a job at the market, but Guam was passionate about truck driving. So, he politely declined and found work in the mining industry in Lantapan as, you guessed it, a truck driver. That same year, Guam married a nurse named Consuelo. Francisco helped with the wedding expenses and even gave Guam money for the down payment on a house. As fate would have it, Guam and Consuelo's new home was just 5 houses down from Francisco's. The two families grew even closer, with Guam and Consuelo treating little Antonio like their own nephew. In 2006, Guam and Consuelo welcomed a baby girl into their family. However, since both of them were busy with work, they often left their daughter in the care of her aunt. Fast forward to 2012, Francisco and Imelda decided to send their 13-year-old son Antonio to live with his grandmother in Malabale City. The reason? Schools in the city offered better education than those in Valencia. Even so, Francisco and Imelda made it a point to visit Antonio 2 to 3 times a month to ensure he stayed connected with them. Years passed, and Antonio grew up and graduated from high school. At 18, his parents encouraged him to continue his studies in Malabale City, but Antonio had other plans. He asked for a one-year break, saying he wanted to spend time at home in Valencia City before heading off to college. By June 2017, Antonio was back in Valencia, staying at his grandparents' house. He also began helping his parents sell fruit at the market, which turned out to be quite an adventure. A section of the market was a floating market, something Antonio had never seen before. He also started visiting his uncle Guam's house, only to find out that things had changed. Guam's wife, Consuelo, had moved to Quezon for work and only returned home once a week. Meanwhile, their daughter was being cared for by another aunt, as Guam worked long hours every day. Then came the night of July 15, 2017. At around 11:30 p.m., while lying in bed playing games with the lights off, Antonio heard the sound of creaking wood coming from the side of the house. Curious and a little uneasy, he got up and went to the kitchen, then stepped into the backyard to investigate. But it was eerily quiet. There was no one there. As he looked toward the side of the house, he noticed that the window to his parents' room was wide open. Alarmed, he approached it, only to see the window suddenly slam shut from the inside. What really unsettled him was what he noticed next: a pair of flip-flops sitting just beneath the window. They didn't belong to anyone in the house, and he had no idea whose they could be. Feeling uneasy, Antonio knocked on the window and called out. His first thought was that someone might have broken in while his parents were asleep. Although the window had iron bars on the inside, he knew they could be opened and closed. After a moment, his father's voice came from inside the room, saying, "Go to sleep, son. It's late." Reassured, Antonio relaxed and made his way back into the house through the kitchen, feeling relieved but still a bit puzzled about the strange flip-flops left outside. The next day, Antonio brought up the strange events from the night before. He asked his mom, Imelda, about the window and the flip-flops outside. Her response was casual. "Oh, those must have been the plumber's sandals. And I opened the window because it was hot." That didn't sit right with Antonio. Why would they need the window open if the room had air conditioning? But not wanting to overthink it, he let it go. After all, there wasn't any sign of a thief, so maybe it wasn't a big deal. 3 days later, around 2 a.m., Antonio woke up again, this time to the sound of the front door creaking open. Curious and a little uneasy, he got up to check. To his surprise, he saw his mother walking into her room with their neighbor Guam, and then closing the door behind them. Antonio froze, his heart pounding. He tried to shake the strange thoughts running through his head. Guam. But Dad's in there too. Confused, he went back to his room but couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. At 5 a.m., he heard the front door close again. Peeking out, he saw his dad locking it and heading back to the bedroom, completely unaware that Antonio was standing just a few feet away. Antonio wanted to say something but didn't have the courage. Instead, he returned to his room and eventually dozed off. A week later, it happened again. This time, Antonio only dared to peek from the front door. Eventually, he worked up the courage to ask his dad about it. "You must have seen it wrong," Francisco replied casually. The lights were dim. Guam came by to drop off the fruit receipts, but he didn't go into the room. He left right after. Antonio stayed quiet, unsure whether to believe him. He wanted to press further but feared making his dad angry. Then, another week passed. One early morning around 4 a.m., as Antonio went to the kitchen for a drink, he noticed Guam outside, jumping the fence. Now he was really confused. If he's just delivering notes, why not do it in broad daylight? And why sneak around like that? Still, he shrugged it off, telling himself, maybe that's just how he works. But everything changed on the morning of August 11, 2017. Around 6:30 a.m., Antonio woke up to loud commotion outside, followed by the sound of an ambulance. Rushing out, he learned there had been a tragedy at Guam's house. Guam, just 38 years old, had been shot in the head. He didn't survive. His wife, Consuelo, was taken into custody by the police, accused of the crime. Later that day, around noon, the police showed up at Antonio's house and arrested his parents, Francisco and Imelda, on charges of misconduct. Shocked and confused, Antonio's grandparents flew in from Malabale City to be by his side. So, what really happened? Let's rewind to 1998. 4 years into their marriage, Francisco and Imelda were struggling to have a child. Francisco's obesity affected his fertility, leaving them desperate for a solution. In a shocking twist, Francisco asked his then 19-year-old friend Guam to have a relationship with Imelda so they could conceive a child. For a hefty fee, Guam agreed. A year later, their son, Antonio, was born. The money Guam earned helped him save up, get married, and even put a down payment on a house. By 2012, Guam's bond with Antonio had grown surprisingly close. Too close, in fact. This prompted Francisco and Imelda to send their son to Malabale City to live with his grandmother. The decision left Guam angry, but he kept his emotions in check. To smooth things over, Francisco gave Guam extra money, hoping to maintain their friendship. In 2016, tensions flared again. A heated argument broke out between Francisco, Imelda, and Guam, escalating to an exchange of angry text messages. What they didn't know was that Guam's wife, Consuelo, had read the messages while her husband was asleep. What she discovered left her shaken. The texts hinted at a disturbing secret. When she confronted them, all three, Francisco, Imelda, and Guam, denied everything. They brushed it off as a joke, leaving Consuelo frustrated. She suspected the worst but couldn't prove it. By June 2017, when Antonio returned home from Malabale City, Consuelo had had enough. She requested a work transfer to Quezon, leaving her child in the care of an aunt. Meanwhile, something far more sinister was happening in the shadows of the household. For years, Francisco, Imelda, and Guam had been involved in an illicit relationship, one that began after Antonio was sent to live with his grandmother. Shockingly, even after Antonio came back home, the behavior continued. It wasn't just Antonio who witnessed their actions late at night. Consuelo had seen it too. But Guam always found ways to excuse his behavior, leaving Consuelo increasingly distraught. On the morning of August 11, 2017, everything came to a head. Consuelo caught Guam sneaking out of Francisco's bedroom window. Unable to take it anymore, she waited for him at home, armed with a gun she had kept hidden for years. By dawn, Guam was dead. At her trial in Valencia City's High Court on December 16, 2018, Consuelo was found guilty of intentionally killing her husband. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As for Francisco and Imelda, they weren't let off the hook. Both were charged with misconduct and received 6-month prison sentences. After the trial, custody of Antonio was granted to his grandmother, who took him back to Malabale City. While Francisco and Imelda eventually regained their freedom, the court ruled they couldn't see Antonio again until he turned 25. What lessons can we learn from this story?